Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Lords of Limited. My name is Ben Warney, and joining me on the line, Mr. Ethan, the draft fossilosopher himself, Sax. How's it going, my friend?
Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, you know? I'm doing great, except I didn't get the memo and I feel woefully underdressed for this morning's recording.
Yeah,
You're looking dapper if you're watching on YouTube. You know that Ben is looking sharp this fine AM.
rocking the suit and tie. We got a concert immediately after recording here, so I am going to split and head off to educate the youth of America, conduct the youth of America, in a fine musical performance of holiday music.
Oh my goodness. What can you give us a little preview of what renditions we'll be seeing? What's the grand finale?
The best piece is called Boomwhacker Christmas. You know what boomwhackers are? Those like plastic tubes that are pitched. So we have 8 adults that are going to be wearing hard hats, and then kids play the boomwhackers on their heads, like interspersed with the
Oh,
band. It'll be fun. I think it's going to
that
be a
is
good time.
fun. I like that. My 11-month-old just discovered those at the local toy library, and he likes them quite a bit. He mostly likes to try and grab them and watch them roll across the floor and then crawl after them. It's just endless hours of entertainment.
He sounds exactly the same as my middle school percussionist.
Yeah, exactly. So I can't believe that this is what we're going for with this week's title. I just didn't have anything better to do. But yeah, we are going to be talking about our draft fossilosophy here this week, though it's not really dinosaur related, honestly.
Not dinosaur related, but a sneak peek behind the curtain here. I got a Discord message from Ethan that said, I had an amazing thought last night. I woke up in the middle of the night with an idea for an episode title that had fossil instead of philosophy, and then I woke up the next morning and realized that those words had nothing in common with each other. And I was like, I don't know. Kind of got a nice ring to it.
Got a nice ring to it. So yeah, so I think we're, normally about 4 episodes deep to the format. We might be trying to focus in on something, or maybe we thought about doing, our little let's do how we would prepare for the pro tour, like top commons and uncommons pick order thing. A little weird because there isn't actually a pro tour. So I think we're just going to be trying to maybe clarify some things from last week, touch base with where we're at on the format. We haven't really talked about, the sort of black sheep of the format, which is black, and talk about, how to perhaps maximize the worst color in the format, the big air quotes worst color in the format, and look at some draft logs and show how we're navigating things in terms of maybe sticking to a plan as early as pick one, pack one, or maybe bobbing and weaving a little bit as I think you can do sometimes. So that's sort of the scope of what we got going on this week. First things first, before we get into that, some housekeeping stuff. Let's talk about the Patreon page. Patreon.com/Lords of Limited is where folks can go to give back to the show if they so choose. The show, of course, will always be free, but we have some great perks over at the Patreon page. Everybody who gives back via the Patreon gets access to the Lords of Limited Discord. It's the season of giving. You want to give back to us by becoming a patron. We want to give back to you by giving you awesome perks like Discord access, like access to the show a day early, access to our show notes if you want to see the episode in written form, access to a private section of the Discord, and even access to monthly coaching sessions with me or Ben. So if any or all of that is of interest to you, if you're, it's the season of giving and you're trying to treat yourself as Ben might be with his beta basics, I think this is a great little thing to give yourself if you're trying to invest in your Magic future, in your Magic community. And of course, we want to shout out our new patrons the first week that they join. This week, we're welcoming Kayla, Scott, Justin, Julian, Kennephus Prime, and Che. Thank you. We really appreciate your support.
Yeah, cannot say thank you enough. I want to get to know Kennephus Prime. That sounds like a sweet username. Show is also brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc. CoolStuffInc.com, where they have cool stuff in stock. Ethan's been talking about the holiday season, and CoolStuffInc.com is where you should be doing the shopping for your gamer loved ones of choice. Whatever you need, they've got it there, whether it's stocking up on those draft booster boxes before draft is officially dead, and we have only play boosters coming up in February with Murders at Karlov Manor. That's the name of the format, I believe.
Well done.
Nailed it. And other games as well. So whatever you're getting for those loved ones, or maybe even for yourself, please make sure that you use checkout code LOL all caps to get 5% off your order, and let CoolStuffInc.com know that we sent you over there.
Boom. All right, let's clarify some things from last episode, Ben, because I think, we used the big word, the big swear word, the F word, forcing. Is that really what we're doing? Is that really how the best way to describe what we were doing in the format last week?
Well, you caught me off guard with that a little bit. That was not in our show notes. And I was thinking about it. I was like, well, I'm pretty close to doing that. But I don't think that's what it is. I kind of want to try to describe the phenomenon of what I was doing. For me, and I did say this last week's episode, but it's more about drafting a deck with a cohesive plan right from the get go and trying to make sure that I can play as many of my picks as possible in that deck with a cohesive plan. And I think what that was doing unintentionally, I think I was off on card evaluations, like on some enough key card evaluations and archetype evaluations that drafting in that manner, like that felt uncomfortable to me and was going against my nature as a drafter, which is to bob and weave and, really try to find the open lane and get hooked up. I think that was actually causing me to evaluate cards correctly, like cards that I should have been picking anyway and maybe wouldn't have picked because I wasn't assigning them enough value. You know what I mean? Like it was actually getting me to draft the right way for the format, but framing it differently in my head than just having the correct card evaluations. You know what I mean? Like, so for example, I would pick Staggering Size in a spot where I thought, this isn't good enough to pick, but it goes very well in my deck. And then I'm just ending up getting to play a very good card that I'm probably not high enough on. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. I'm glad you gave an example. I was going to ask you to clarify. So you're saying that this idea that you presented last week of like I'm going to keep calling it forcing, even though that's not what we're saying, but that this idea of perhaps weighting your early picks more, drafting a cohesive deck, whatever, then caused you thought what you were doing was like maybe taking hits in power level that you were forcing. You were, okay, I want to stay green for Polani's Hatcher, so I'm going to take Staggering Size here. But that was actually just giving the proper weight to a card like Staggering Size. So this mentality shift allowed you to perhaps properly evaluate some cards in the format that you weren't in previous weeks.
Yes, I completely agree. I think there were like about 5 to 20-ish commons, like somewhere in that number.
That's
I
quite
was
a
either
spread.
it's quite a spread, like of the cards that you would play with that I was either too high or too low on. We always talk about like that mental chart you have in your head of how things are weighted and what hits you're willing to take in power level. And I was just calibrated wrong. And I think drafting in that manner forced me to calibrate correctly, even though I hadn't quite assigned the proper value to those cards yet in my head.
Yeah. Do you have another example off the top? I love the Staggering Size example. That really resonates with me.
I think also just bumping down cards like Miner's Guide Wing. So for example, would have been very willing to aggressively take Miner's Guide Wings, and I think that's wrong. Like looking back on it, I think some of the advice we gave, like certainly Miner's Guide Wing into putting a +1/+1 counter on it, is a good way to put a lot of pressure on your opponent in this format, but it's also very easily answered and it's kind of fragile. And I think after the first like 3 or 4 days of the format, people were largely ready to combat that strategy. And I think I kept doing it too long into the format.
We didn't talk about this last week, but the format feels to have slowed down quite a bit. Not only in best of 3 where we were messing around before the arena opened, but also in best of 1, I found just like, the slower decks. We'll talk about, I think, how control decks, whatever, slower decks, control decks, however you want to put it, tick in the format a little later in the episode. But I think those strategies are certainly open and available and quite competitive. I don't think it's just like, again, still, I think the philosophy of the fossilosophy.
Ooh, nailed it. Way to work in that episode title.
Thanks, bud. Of the format starts on turn 1 is still quite true, but I don't think that leads to blisteringly fast games, game over on turn 5, turn 6, that sort of thing.
Right. I think that is a great way to kind of sum up where I went wrong. Because I mean, if you're losing as much as I was losing, I was getting unlucky, but I also am doing something fundamentally wrong. Like that has to be true. I think for me to have taken that big of a hit in win rate, I think I was really proud of us nailing Jeskai and Blue White like week 0, like after doing 5 drafts or whatever, and the whole format starts on turn 1 thing. Like I really felt like we got it right. And I do think that still holds true, but I think I went like way too far in that direction. Like I think I overcorrected that way too much and wasn't taking into account plans for the mid game or the late game, and then would sputter out or would have draws that weren't quite aggressive enough, even though my deck had a lot of ways to be aggressive, And I just think I wasn't seeing the whole picture of the format, which is weird for me also because like if you think about it, like I feel like certainly lately the last year or so, I've been the biggest champion of level 2 decks, like in a lot of the formats, rather than like Jeskai, which is level 1 here, right? Like the blue white, the blue red, the red white. And certainly I think red white a step down from blue white and blue red. I think it is less good than those two decks. But that it's been a while since I've been drafting the deck that everybody else is trying to draft at the start of a format, you know? Like if you think about Lord of the Rings, like red black was the thing to do there for the data, and I wasn't doing that almost from the get-go because I found my own other thing that worked, that I liked to do. And I do think Sam Black was really on to Descend and Black and these grindy archetypes from early on, and I'd shout out to him. Like a lot of the stuff, I think, at least my perspectives on Black, I haven't listened to him talk about it, but I've seen enough of his lists and other lists, I think, that were inspired by what he's doing in the format that, shout out to him for seeing all of that and how to make it work right from the get-go.
Yeah, for sure. So we sort of touched on this, but just to really hammer home, this level 1 are these Jeskai decks, which we're talking about, like blue, white, blue, red. And I think we're going to talk about the level 2 and below stuff a little later in the episode. Like what, and not really the like, if people are zigging, this is how you zag. It's just like, these are the other strategies that are available to you. And I do find that more often than not, because of people focusing on level 1, they're more available, or you can get, the ceiling is perhaps higher on those decks.
Yeah, but I think the caveat of those decks, like this was a reminder for me as well, because I have not played a ton this past week. I've played when I can, but it's been very busy. But I have been thinking about it a lot, and I really talked myself into all these Black Descend decks, just how to frame them and things like that. And then I did like one of the qualifier play-ins and had an absolutely bonkers black-green pool. Everything you could want, like all of the mill 2 cards, triple of the mill 2 1/1 death touch and good removal. I had the Bringer of the Last gift or whatever it's called, the demon that flips your graveyard. It was a dream pre-constructed black-green sealed pool, and I was like, oh, this is great. I'm gonna be one and done. This is awesome. And I promptly O2'd to like 2 above average blue-white decks. I mean, like, because I was just in not the best color pairs in the format. I had a very good black-green deck, and I do still think there's a significant power level gap here. And one last gripe about the format before we get into this. Yes.
All right.
I finally realized this. This was an epiphany for me. This is the most succinct way I can describe what I think is wrong with this format or why it doesn't appeal to me, is that when you're exploring, you're hoping to hit a +1/+1 counter, not a land. And that is so backwards for me. And I'm rooting for my opponents to draw cards instead of get a +1/+1 counter on their flyer. Like that's, you should be hoping to hit a land with Explore, I think, in a good draft format.
I don't understand this gripe, but you are an equal co-host of the show, so you use the platform however you please.
That doesn't feel backwards to you? Do you think that's true, that you're hoping to hit a +1/+1 counter off Explore?
I think that's true. I don't feel like that has to be a bug. It can be a feature. Oof. Isn't that, you could frame it as, isn't that kind of cool that like you expected this mechanic to be a certain way and it's the opposite?
Sort of, except like it's so bad when you miss on hitting a +1/+1 counter. Like if you take a mana to Explore under your flyer and you whiff and draw a land instead, it's very detrimental.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't feel great.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. All right, let's take a quick break and we'll be back with a word from our dear friend Amaz. All right, Ben, where is the format at right now?
I was feeling this quite a bit and then saw this tweet from Amaz and I was like, amen, preach. This is exactly what I kind of been feeling and having problems with in drafts prior to kind of shifting things around. His Twitter status says, this is from November 30th, so 3 or 4 days ago, but I still think all this certainly holds true and is going to continue to hold true a little more deeper into the format. 30th draft trophy on LCI, highest win rate set I've done. If there's one tip I'd give drafters right now, it's to avoid white, worst color in the set, and super overrated as well. I'm not going quite that far as worst color in the set. I think there's a little bit of hyperbole there, but someone asked him a follow-up to elaborate, and his response, which was much more measured, is white has really low-statted creatures, fairly weak uncommons, do agree there for sure, and most cards require something else to function, like its flyers needing a +1/+1 counter, but more importantly, it loses the late game versus every other color. And I do find that is true. And I think that's where I was running into a lot of trouble when I had forced too far into the format starts on turn one, format's blisteringly fast narrative that we had kind of spun out.
Yeah, I hadn't, of course, because I never do, like put these sort of like concepts or these feelings to words like this. And I agree there's a bit of hyperbole there, but I'll co-sign this. I have found white, you know, there's an issue with white that goes back to what you were talking about last week with like your deck really has to be focused. And if there's just a few pieces off, it can feel bad. I think when you've got like a really focused white red or white blue aggro deck, and white green I guess too, but I haven't had those myself yet. When you have the focused white aggro decks, white does that very well. So it doesn't win the late game, but like that's not what your deck is trying to do, so that's fine. Your deck is trying to win the game as fast as possible. Where you get into trouble is when you're a white deck that isn't trying to do that, and somehow you're still like, well, I could play some Miner's Guidewings. I mean, Miner's Guidewings not too bad, right? And like, well, then I'll play some Ironpaw Aspirants, and then you're just like,
It's a very slippery slope.
It's a very slippery slope. It's
I agree.
hard. Like, I think white plays a good support role with its removal. We've talked about Saw Blaze. We've talked about Cosmium Blast. I think even Petrify, Duskrose Reliquary. White has really good cheap interaction at common and uncommon. Its bodies, however, don't play well in that defensive space or in that non-hyper aggressive space, that I think you get into trouble if you're just a few clicks off from that kind of strategy.
Well, and one of the biggest things is if exactly what you said. If it doesn't work great, you end up understated, and like sometimes even like medium dinosaurs decks just kill you way faster because their creatures have 4 and 5 power, and you have 1 and 2 power on your evasive things. Like if your draw didn't line up absolutely perfectly, or maybe you went all in on that Miner's Guidewing and your opponent had the Abrade to snap it off when you got it up to 3 power and then follows up with some dinosaurs. Like there's just a lot of ways to lose the game as a white player. So I think going back to our color power rankings, and we had kind of shifted white up equal to blue. I think for me, it is blue 1, red 2, kind of white and black tied for third. And I do still think green is in last, largely because I feel very strongly at this point right now that blue is still the best color, kind of my going back to my initial thoughts. But that green gets a huge knock because it doesn't play well with blue.
Yo, I think you saw that tweet, right, from MTG Data Science?
Yes, not a data boy, but I mean, like you know what, you always feel like blue-green is the redheaded stepchild of the draft archetypes.
Yeah.
Seeing it on paper like that was a little eye-opening.
So MTG Data Science posted they had aggregated all of the color pairs win rates or trophy rates, I guess, from like every format that was available on 17 lands. And basically it's like red, black in the lead, then all 8 color pairs coming up next, like pretty close together. What was kind of interesting was all 4 of white's color pairs were in the front of that 8 pack. And then huge drop. And then there's blue green, just sad and lonely. I think we may have to shout out blue green for the last time on the podcast. You know, I don't know if that's
shout out for those old listeners. Shout out to blue green.
Yeah, from the Eldraine days. But yeah, pretty stark there for blue green. I think that's a really good point. I do think blue definitely still feels like the best color to me, and I also I like green with black. I like green black Descend a lot. Obviously, green red dinos is great. Like I said, I haven't really done much green white aggro in the format myself. But yeah, green is it just feels like you've got to be so clear, right? There's not a lot of overlap. That's what blue does so well, is it sort of like toes the line pretty well between artifacts and value and craft and aggro. And like you can, I think you don't have to sort of narrow in on what your strategy is so early, but you do kind of have to do that with the other colors.
Right, blue does let you stay more flexible in the draft, for sure, if you can manage to start blue. But the other thing I want to dial in on, just quickly to get your opinion on, because I have a thought on this, and I'm curious where you're at. For red-green dinos, everybody just keeps saying red-green dinos. And I think there's many flavors of dinos, and it is not quite clear how to build dinos, other than that Dinosaur Tribal is a theme that is supported by red-green. But I haven't really heard anybody dive into exactly what an ideal dinos build looks like. Where are you at on the like low curve beatdown spectrum to the ramping with poison dart frog to larger dinosaurs spectrum.
Yeah, I think my gut says don't ramp with Poison Dart Frog, except Pathfinding Axstraw is so good. Like the fours that you get are so good. Like in my mind, I'm like, well, if you want a ramper, you want the Ixalis, whatever, the one drop green uncommon that ramps, but only for dinosaur spells. But I think that's a little too narrow, and it's not that important that you jump from one to
1 to 3,
three.
right?
Like, sure, you can get the armored kincaller on 3, but not a huge deal to get that early. But I think getting Axtra or Colossodactyl or Dino Tomato on turn 3. I mean, that's how it's spelled, right?
I knew exactly what you meant.
Dino Tomato. That I think Poison Dart Frog probably does belong in that deck, even though in my mind I'm like, don't play a 2-mana 1/1 in your aggro deck, because it's not an aggro, it's like a mid-range deck, right? It's like red green Garbo from Modern Cube.
I don't think it is.
No?
I think the best versions of dinos are low to the ground. This was another epiphany I've had. Our card evaluation change, I guess, is that one in a red 2/2 that turns into a 3/3 when you're brawling with dinos. I think that's the key. Like, I think you want those, and then just happen to have dinosaurs to turn that on, plus staggering size. Like, those are the ones that beat me the hardest, are like the super low to the ground aggro staggering size that have that 2/2 that turns into a 3/3 when it attacks or blocks.
Yeah, staggering size is definitely, I think, such a huge player in that deck. It's probably why I haven't drafted it that much. It's just because, like, as I talked about last week, just hard for me to calibrate staggering size. That's probably just a personal note. Perhaps as we near the end of the calendar year, a 2024 resolution is to not underrate the green combat
that give
tricks.
trample.
Yeah, I think so.
So, taking a broader look at the format, I'm curious to see how you view this too. It's kind of settled for me into 3 pillars, which are artifact aggro decks or artifact control decks, but artifact decks, artifact synergy decks, dinosaur beatdown, and then black-based descend control. Like that, those are the 3 tenets of the format.
Feels a little generous to give dinosaur beatdown its own pillar.
Well, but that kind of, yeah, I agree, but it is there and it doesn't fall into either of those other buckets, I guess. So it almost has to have its own pillar.
Doesn't blue, because I feel like it's just like, no, I guess that's true, because like the blue control decks are the black descend decks.
They're black descend decks that just use blue's cards well, yeah.
Yeah, I guess you could have like heavy blue with a couple white removal spells, like white as a real support color if you were control, but...
Yeah, and I think you can play blue-white control as well. So, yeah, I think maybe that's not quite all of them there.
Yes,
blue-white I actually like better as mid-range control.
I do too.
Hyper aggro at the moment.
Because that, when you think about the Master's Guide mural, like that's what that card is telling you, like, get this game to go as long as possible and you will win, right?
That and Clay Fried Bricks. Both those cards are just insane.
That card, speaking of the just getting dumpstered in the qualifier play-in yesterday, that just feels like the biggest overperformer win the game on turn 2 card for me. Like every time my opponent played Clay Fried Bricks, I was like, well, I lose. I don't know how I can beat this.
It's tough.
The card is really, really good. Yeah, so I like that, but I agree, and I think it's kind of right to not have white aggro as a pillar here. I think once you shift that out of a pillar, going back to Amaz's tweet, I think you will have a better framework of the format.
All right, so we talked pillars of the format, and let's get into some of the packages of commons that go up in those pillars, because I think we haven't really dived into that sort of thing, and we're going to get deep into Descend and Black Control here, but just kind of key cards for that archetype. Another Chance, that's the 2 and a black instant, mill 2, rebuy 2 creature cards. What that's essentially doing for you is letting you tutor for your best cards, right?
That's an aggressive way to describe it, but yeah, sure.
In an ideal version of the deck, you're churning through your library and dumping them into the graveyard. And when you mill your bombs and you draw your Another Chance, it's just like a second copy of your best cards.
Yeah.
I really do think that is its best function in Descend and Black Control, and also letting you just grind and out 2-for-1 your opponent in the late game. It ensures that you are going to win the late game, I think, generally.
Yeah.
There's Deathcap Marionette. This might be the single most important card to the archetype. 1 in a black, 1/1, Death Touch, Mill 2, alongside Mineshaft Spider. I would have told you both of those cards were certainly Mineshaft Spider replacement level at the start of the format, and they are irreplaceable if you are playing any sort of descend strategy. Also, along with if you're a blue based descend strategy, this isn't on our show notes, but Sage of Days, the 2 and a blue 3/2 that dumps 3 into the yard or lets you keep one, like you just have to be able to proactively fill your graveyard regardless of what your opponent is doing.
Yeah, the more you can utilize your graveyard as a resource or the cards from your graveyard as resources or whatever, if it's, it's not quite Theros Beyond Death style of like, 3 cards in your graveyard equals a card with the, what was that mechanic called? All I can think of is
Escape.
Eternalize. Escape, thank you. But it's not quite that, but it is pretty strong. Like the more you can, your Deathcap Marionette mills, and then it dies, and then another chance mills and gets back your Marionette, and then your Marionette mills again. Like you really feel like you're doing it at that point.
Well, you also Skullcap Snail, I think, goes up a little bit too once you start valuing another chance higher. Initially we were saying like this doesn't really have a place in the format, but I do in these black decks that are trying to grind the opponent out. You play your Skullcap Snail, they exile a card, you chump with it, you play another chance, you cast it again. Like it does get pretty annoying, like the second or third Skullcap Snail that you're casting.
Yes, and in conjunction with a card that I have to apologize for, not like publicly on the podcast, never called it out, but I might as well. Deep Cavern Bat, you would be astonished at how high that is in the overall uncommons.
No, I
Game in
would
hand
not.
win
That
rate.
card's incredible.
It's number 3.
That would not shock me. It's incredible. It is backbreaking. When I've played it, it's so easy to win games, and when my opponents play it, it's so hard to win. It's everything you want. It's disruption, it's pressure, it's defense, like all for 2 mana. And then when they deal with it, you cast another chance and bring it back, and you take another card.
Yeah, no, it's excellent, and I think Skullcap Snail really is like the sad budget version of that, but it's still pretty good. You talked about chumping. It's also like you don't feel bad about, okay, yeah, I'll just double block my 1/1 and my 2/2 against your Armored Kincaller because I know I'm gonna another chance it back later. You're right, like that sort of redundancy of, and I would even say, I forget the name of it, but the 2 mana uncommon artifact that lets you snag an artifact or creature out of their hand, and then you can flip it into a 5/4 menace that mills 2. I think that there is this nice like redundancy package of hand disruption with Bat, that uncommon artifact, and Snail that like they all sort of buoy each other up, and that also helps make Snail feel better.
Yeah, for sure. And taking a look at dinosaurs, we kind of already touched on this a little earlier, but the most important card for that, I think, is actually Burning Sun Cavalry, which would not have been on my radar a week ago. I would have thought that card was hoping to not play, but I do think it's a key card in those dinosaur decks. The 1 in a red 2/2 that when it attacks or blocks while you control a dinosaur, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. That and the combat tricks, Ancestors Aid, the +2/+0 first strike, make a treasure. Winning a combat and then ramping to an even bigger dinosaur the next turn is pretty oppressive. And Staggering Size, just closing out the game, giving +3/+3 and trample. And we've touched on Atali's Favor the last couple weeks as well. And I do think, having played with it a bit more and played against it more, I do think this green-red beatdown dinosaurs deck is its absolute best home.
Yes, no, totally agree. All right, enough of this aggro talk. I'm going to talk about control decks in the format because that's
Speaking my language.
Well, that is where I've been leaning and having the most success recently with black-based decks, certainly, which I think is hilarious because I mean it's really on brand. I feel like I have returned to form in terms of everyone saying black is terrible, and I'm out here just like, you want to keep passing me chupacabras? Okay, I guess so. Like,
speaking of cards, like that card is so broken.
Yes.
Ravenous Chupacabra is illegal. Completely illegal.
Chupacabra Echo. But yes, it does feel like Ravenous Chupacabra.
It is, yeah, it is Ravenous Chupacabra with an extra point of power.
Yes.
Isn't it a 3/2?
Yeah, it is a 3/2.
Good Lord.
So, we've talked about control decks a lot on the show in the past, and it's the same kind of recipe, but I think just knowing the specific ingredients from LCI is really important. Cheap interaction is the name of the game for these decks to function. I mean, you need a lot of pieces for the deck to function, but I think cheap interaction really, really helps you. I've been championing Deadweight from the start. I do still think it is Black's best common. And I think part of why people perhaps are struggling with Black or think Black is weak is that Deadweight doesn't seem to be doing that well for them. It seems to be going pretty late. It's pretty low in the data rankings of top commons. I have still been very, very happy with Deadweight. The double whammy of killing something cheap early and adding to your descend is just like exactly what the deck wants to do. So not only is it adding for a descend trigger at your end step if your deck cares about having descended that turn, but it just sits in the graveyard as a permanent. Tithing Blade, I've really gone on an emotional roller coaster with this card. But the thing that I finally have wrapped my head around is that you don't need to flip it. Flipping this is like kind of gravy, kind of maybe like you finish them off with it. It's not, you're never like getting them from 20 to 0 with 2 flipped Tithing Blades. That's just not how this deck performs at all. You might flip 1 at some point, but the conjunction of Tithing Blade and Deadweight together, of Deadweight can handle the 1-drop and the 2-drop, and then Tithing Blade is answering the 3-drop or the 4-drop while you're able to double spell, is really powerful. Then it's something for you to sacrifice to Fanatical Offering, maybe. You can utilize that rectangle on the board as an artifact. You're just not flipping it. So I think once I separated that idea of like, oh, I have to flip it, this is my deck's plan, I understood Tithing Blade a lot better.
So there's a black removal spell that you have not mentioned here, which
Mm-hmm.
is Join the Dead. 1
Yes.
black instant -5/-5. Where are you at on the mixture of those cards? Like in a black control deck, what is the numbers of each of those removal spells in your ideal black descend deck that you would like to end up with?
I know I want the most dead weights, and I do want Join the Deads. It's just not quite cheap enough. I can't call a 3-mana removal spell cheap interaction, because what I want out of my Join the Dead is I'm like, okay, when the dust has settled, if you happen to have a token around and my Tithing Blade can't, get your Pathfinding Axejaw out of the way, I need something that can deal with your larger threats. And so that can be Join the Dead, and I'm happy to play 1, 2, 3 copies of Join the Dead depending on what my curve looks like. But I'm also happy to get that piece of interaction from a different color, right? From whatever color I'm pairing black with. Dare I say, I'm not happy to do it, but I'll play a Ray of Ruin if my curve says I can. If I don't get a Join the Dead, Ray of Ruin sort of does that. It just does what I'm trying to do, which is, hey, I got to answer your 6-drop. Okay, I need to do that, So I do think Deadweight and Tithing Blade are more important than Join the Dead, but I like all 3.
That was a very politician answer, sir. You have not answered my original question. I need
You want me to
ratios and numbers for a skeleton.
I would say 3-2-1. 3 Deadweights, 2 Tithing Blades, 1 Join the Dead.
That's interesting. I think the reason I'm trying to
or 2-2-2, like, but
that's closer to where I'm at. I think I would want. I think like 2 Deadweight. Like I think my gut says like 2 Deadweight, 1 Tithing Blade, 2 Join the Dead.
It's dangerous to put numbers on this, because then we get tweets of deck lists, and then people are like, you said to play 2-2-2, and I 0-3'd with this. Like, so you're setting me up for failure here.
No, I'm not trying to do that to you at all. I'm trying to dial in on. I'm certain I'm higher on Join the Dead than you are, and I'm trying to put my finger on why. And I think I was thinking about it while you were talking about this stuff, and I do agree with your Deadweight Tithing Blade. Tithing Blade handling the bigger stuff if you've got the Deadweight. The biggest issue I found is Deadweight doesn't answer a lot of the premium rares that come down on turn 3. Like it doesn't stop a lot of them in their tracks, like the ones that snowball super hard.
You don't need, like, that's a lot to ask of you. You're like, what I'm mad about with my common 1-mana removal is that it doesn't answer the 3-mana bombs. Like, yeah,
sure, but Join the Dead does, which I think is why I'm a little higher on Join the Dead, because I found myself losing to, with Deadweights in hand, losing to those types of rares or losing to dinosaurs. Like I think Deadweight also matches up quite poorly against dinosaurs.
Yes, I agree with that. I do think, and this came up just because I was like streaming randomly the other day, and someone was asking me about my sequencing with Deadweight and Tithing Blade, because mana efficiency is king. But you really have to, like, if you have Deadweight and Tithing Blade in hand and you can cast either, and dead weight's going to kill the thing, you have to cast dead weight to kill the
Sure.
thing.
Yes.
If you
Agree.
sequence that incorrectly, you're going to have a bad time. And also, you have to know when you're like, look, shrinking this pathfinding axe draw to a 2/1 or even a 3/2 is what I need to do this turn. Like, you have to do that. You have to be okay, because one of the things that I think these black decks do well is 2-for-1 themselves, because they're going to accrue that value later on. And so if you have to 2-for-1 yourself early in the game, you can be okay with that, right? Like, if they play an Inti and it's growing, or the threat is growing because of Inti, you're going to have to do what you can to get that card off the board. And if it's 2-for-1ing yourself a couple times to get through a trick, that's what you got to do, you know?
Yeah, I
Uh,
agree. And I think black does that very well.
I do think so.
Recoups card advantage. I completely agree.
Yeah. A braid, obviously, cheap interaction. All of White's cards that we shouted out earlier: Saw Blades, Cosmian Blast, Petrify, Duskrow's Reliquary. The next thing on this list that goes in conjunction with cheap interaction is defensive speed. I think chief among these is Deathcat Marionette. Again, a card that has just so risen in my estimation from the start of the format, because what it does so well is, first of all, trades with any big dumb dinosaur, basically, unless they're activating their Cavern Stomper or whatever, so it can't block. But Marionette's just really good. Again, don't be afraid to trade this off on turn 2, right? You just play it and trade with their 2-drop, their 1-drop, whatever. That's part of what this card can do. Shipwreck Sentry, you shouted this out early as like, this is an aggro card. I gotta say, Moat Piranhas has not has not disappointed, especially if your rare that was a common for you last format was Goose Mother. For me, it's Throne of the Grim Captain. I am a magnet for that card, and Shipwreck Sentry has good types for the throne as well. So just like cards like that, whatever. And I think it's important to note something that I had been lumping into this category, which I have stopped, is River Herald Guide, the 2-mana 1/2 with Explore in blue, for exactly the reason before, is that, yes, I'm just hoping to hit a +1/+1 counter, and when half the time it draws me a land, I'm mad, because now my 2-drop can't trade with anything.
Right. Shipwreck Center is just a much better, because it always comes out as a 3/3, right?
Yeah.
But it's so backwards. Okay, we're not going to get into it.
I hear what you're saying, but again, I think that mental shift is that's why we love limited, is that like, it's like, oh, actually, in this environment, Shipwreck Sentry does the thing better than River Herald Guide. You would look at
Put those two magic cards side by side, like when you're evaluating cards.
Yeah.
River Herald Guide is a worlds better, like, quote unquote, Magic the Gathering card.
Not in Ixalan, where it's backwards day.
Not in Ixalan, I agree. And I the more I have come to terms with that and accepted it for what it is, the more I have been winning in the format. I agree.
And then reasons for the game to go long, right? You can't just have a deck of cheap interaction and defensive speed and think you're going to win the game. Once you've set yourself up for this, how are you going to close? And, bombs, there are bombs aplenty. They're not only cheap, there are some expensive bombs, but you can also win with expensive bombs. We've got a draft log I think we'll maybe get to a little bit later that's one of yours, where like you just take the 3-mana 3/3 white angel that if you gain 5 life, you get to poop out a 4/4, and you can pump it to make it a 5/5 lifelink. You just pack one, pick one, that, and then you just draft. You're like, I'm going to get the game to go long. I'm going to recur this card. If they kill it, it's going to be great. Sort of what you talked about with drafting Glyph Bridge last week, where you're just like, I picked Glyph Bridge, I built my deck around finding Glyph Bridge, and I won with Glyph Bridge. Like, that really, there are bombs in the format that let you do that. Sweepers are incredible in this set. And that brings me to talking about caves a little bit. I mean, we're going to talk about card advantage as another piece of this puzzle. And I think caves are a big part of that. The hidden lands, like when you're able to, hey, the dust has settled, crack this hidden land, getting spells from your hidden lands, even if they're just 2-drops, is still something. Recursion from black, we've talked about not only the 3-mana common, but defossilize is just excellent.
Defossilize is awesome. I love that card.
Craft is card advantage, right? You're getting a second spell out of your first, you're turning your spring-loaded saw blades into a 5/5 vehicle. You're turning your clay-fired bricks that found you a land into this massive, 2/2/2s plus pump for your whole team. Discover is card advantage, right? Tacked onto, appropriate cards like Appraiser, like not just playing derpy 5-mana things that say 3 things can't block, discover 4. That's not really card advantage. But I do want to talk about caves because I think it's not plan A in draft, but I have backdoored into caves quite a bit and been really darn happy with it. I think it's actually real. Another sort of roller coaster. I think perhaps showing the dangers of us swinging too hard in the Jeskai direction in the early weeks of like format starts on turn one. It's a Jeskai format. You can't afford to stumble, yada yada. All those things are true, but there's some nuance, there's some zhuzhing to be done with the caves deck that I think really does exist. And a lot of it is not pack one. I mean, you can, but it's about not pack one, pick oneing the Calamitous Cave in. It's about noting it and seeing it pack one, pick nine, you
And
know?
wheeling it, and then you end up with 7 or 8 caves, and you
Yes.
have like a package with a Calamitous Cave in. Yeah, that's the best caves deck. I agree. Like the audible into a caves package mid draft
Yes.
when you haven't seen other powerful cards.
Well, speaking of, would you like to hop into a roundtable?
I would love to.
Great. Well, pack one, pick one, pretty easy to sort of echo a draft or a pick we looked at last week. We've got a Polani's Hatcher, 3 red green for a 5/3. Dinos you control have haste. You get 2/01 green dinosaur egg creature tokens at the beginning of combat on your turn. If you control one or more eggs, you sacrifice an egg, then create a 3/3 green dinosaur token. Easy peasy. Pack one, pick two, not so easy peasy, or is it?
I think this is easy peasy for me.
What are you easy peasying here, sir?
So I'm easy peasying Defossilize, which I see as the card that you took, which is 4 and a black for a sorcery. Return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature explores, then it explores again. If I'm 3 colors in the format, it's very likely that I am in Jund. That has been my most common 3-color combination.
And is that because of the recursion that black provides for powerful cards? You're like, all right, I'm going to be 3 colors, but it's because I got the stuff that's making that worth it. And then I'm going to use black's recursion, whether it's Defossilize or Viper or the common 3 mana.
Yeah, it's been for Polani's Hatcher a lot, honestly. Like I've been black green splashing Polani's Hatcher.
Yeah, so I take a Defossilize here. Again, like Staunch Crewmate is, I think, if this were pack one, pick one, that's like the best quote unquote card. 1 on a blue, 2/1. When ETBs look at the top 4 cards of your library, you can reveal an artifact or pirate card from among them and put it into your hand. Like I think if this were pack one, pick one, that's what I would take. A really strong 2-drop in the best color. But once you have Hatcher, Defossilize just skyrockets in your pick
skyrockets,
order.
and also like it's kind of what we talked about last week. When are you moving off Polani's Hatcher to like try to get deeper into blue for Staunch Crewmate? Like if you're faced with choices again, you're always steering towards Polani's Hatcher.
Correct, right? Well, it's if I take Staunch Crewmate here and then just decide to draft blue, but I'm making a decision no matter what. It's not that I'm like, oh, I'll stay open. It's like, no, if you have Polani's Hatcher, you want to draft towards that.
Right. Well, and there are cards like Rumbling Rockslide, Dino Tomato, excuse me.
Yeah.
But that is really what it says, isn't it?
Wow. It's Dino Tomato.
Dino Tomato, and never put that together. But anyway, those cards just aren't quite good enough. That's where, like, I don't want people to start. Like, I want to clarify from last week. It is not forcing. Like, because you could say, well, last week on Lords Limited, they said to not hedge and to not pivot. It's not that. Like, you do still have to be selective. And I think that's more a nod to how good Defossilize is.
Yes.
Rather than like that you wouldn't play a Dinotomaton or a Rumbling Rockslide alongside Polani's Hatcher.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then pack one, pick 3, I think a clear follow-up, at least for me. I'd be curious your thoughts. Oh, I got a wait from Ben here. So for me, a clear follow-up with Deadweight as I'm already in black with Defossilize. I get my cheap interaction here. I know that I've got a bomb. I've got a way to recur that bomb. I want the game to go along. Let's get cheap interaction. Talk to me about what jumps out to you in this pack, sir.
I mean, I see the Deadweight. I'm more, I guess, I don't know.
Deadweight's done something wrong to you. I want to repair the relationship between the two of you. You've faced too many 2/3s, I think.
I have lost a lot with Deadweight in my hand. Wow, this is wild. When you mouse over the cards, you see the data. That is crazy.
You've done. I wish I knew when, but you have done this before on the show.
Have?
Yeah,
it's just a new discovery every time. Armored Kincaller is in the pack as well. That catches my eye. I could be convinced that you're supposed to take Deadweight over Armored Kincaller here, though. It's tough because then, like with this pack, you're basically saying I'm locking in splashing Polani's Hatcher. Like the benefit of taking Armored Kincaller here is you could still not play Defossilize and just draft
Mm,
green red dinosaurs. I think that's
yes.
why my heart wants to go towards Armored Kincaller. But for me, it's close, I would say. I don't know what is right, but I think it's a close pick.
I think that's a great way to frame it because for me, I'm just so much more inclined to draft a black deck right now than I am to just be like, oh, I'll just draft green red. Like, weirdly to me, green red doesn't feel like maximizing Polani's Hatcher.
That is backwards.
Well, once I have to fossilize, it does feel like I just want to wait to like get this into play as many times. I want to find this and then I want to cast it as many times as
It's
possible.
possible, right?
Red green doesn't do that. Red
Right,
green,
right. But yeah, black green does it better. I
yeah,
agree. I'm kind of in for the dead weight pick here. You're kind of selling me on it. I also do like black descend decks better, I think, than red green dinosaur beatdown, just as an archetype for me to pilot.
yes, yeah. Pac one pick four is really interesting. I think I had a tough time with this pick, especially after taking dead weight. You could make the argument to get deeper into black, get another recursive spell for your Polani's Hatcher in Soul Coil Viper, two in a black 2/3, pay black, tap sack it to return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. And then the best card in the pack, I don't know truly what it's doing here. Pack one pick four is Geological Appraiser, 2 red, 3/2, when it ETBs if you cast it, discover 3, about to be banned in Pioneer tomorrow, I assume. I found this pick really difficult. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
I would take Geological Appraiser. Like Soul Coil Viper is on plan, but it's not a like for example, I like it less than Defossilize because when you draw it late, like there's a whole turn delay on when you can get the thing back. And Geological Appraiser is just absolutely incredible. It's on the Ravenous Chupacabra tier of premium cards in the set. And I think one of the questions I had about this Descend deck was, can you do it with commons and uncommons? And I think Chupacabra Echo, I keep calling it Ravenous Chupacabra, but Chupacabra Echo is good enough that you can do it with commons and uncommons. But you do need Chupacabra Echo. You need the bat, the 1/1 lifelinker that takes a card out of their hand. You do need some premium uncommons, but I don't think you have to have the rares to want the game to go long.
I would also shout out Hoverstone Pilgrim. That's the 5 mana
Ugh.
artifact, 2/5 flyer, ward 2, and you can pay 2 to bottom something from a graveyard to the bottom of the library for either you or your opponent. I think that in conjunction with Black's Recursion allows you, because the turbo self mill really does exist. I think in blue black specifically, you can get there with black green too, but blue black turbo self mill is so real that Hoverstone Pilgrim starts stacking your library pretty easily. It already sort of protects itself with ward. If they happen to kill it, you can recur it. If they exile it, it's you're in a bad spot. But I do think you can get there as well with that little package.
Yeah, so I agree with your selection of Geological Appraiser here.
Yeah, I had your voice in my head of like, it's just too powerful, don't pass it, and that's what I landed on. And then I took a Skullcap Snail in the next pack, not much to speak of. And then pack one, pick 6 is where I see a Calamitous Cave-In, and I've already got a control shell here. There was a Gargantuan Leech in the last pack that could wheel, but this is about where. I mean, you don't have to take it. There's an Idol of the Deep King you could take. You know, you start to get into black red splash Polani's Hatcher territory, and that's totally fine. But I think you're just so clearly incentivized to be a control deck at this point with Deadweight, Snail, Hatcher plus Defossilize. Like you've got you're starting that recipe with some of the best ingredients, and Calamitous Cave-In then gives you, a sort of firm stamp direction of where you want to go.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. So I just think like caves are great. Calamitous Cave-In is the best thing to do. It's like the reason I think it's really hard to sell me on getting into caves without it. But I'm sure you can. But I think it's the main reason to do it because it really helps you make up the like, oh, you tapped land, whatever. And I do think you probably need to you don't need to get into it in pack one, but pack one really helps because then that lets you set out for not only wheeling some caves, hopefully, but then you get to sort of know the lay of the land a little bit better in terms of, got to take this cave here. Maybe I can wheel this cave. Because if you get into it later in pack 2, you might end up in this awkward spot where going into pack 3, you're like, any on color caves I have to take no matter what. That's a really terrible spot to be in.
Well, and one of the other things you haven't mentioned here is you're kind of in this one when you pivot for cave in, drafting caves alongside descend and being able to mill caves into your graveyard to
Yes.
turbo charge up your calamitous cave in is a huge part of making calamitous cave in powerful.
Yeah.
Like when you play your death cap cultivator and it mills a cave out of one of the two cards, like that's big game towards like having your calamitous cave in actually be a wrath when you need it to be a wrath, because that's one of the problems with cave in as well, is sometimes like it only does 2 damage and you need it to do 3, you know.
Hmm. So just to sort of hammer home some points or some thoughts I've had about black, I just cannot state enough. Don't be aggressive. It just
EVA.
black cannot do it. Yeah, yeah. Don't be aggressive. Don't be aggressive. Like black can't do it, and that's okay. But because I've even tricked myself a little bit of like I get that black rare, the like 1 mana 1/1 menace that grows if you descend. Get that into a Zoyoa Lava Tongue, and I'm like, this is it. I'm gonna draft a red black. No, you're not gonna do it because it just can't happen. That's not what black does best. And once I started to frame Zoyoa Lava Tongue as, oh, it's not an aggro card.
It's an attrition card.
It's an attrition card. And just like we've talked about with the Deathcap Marionette, the 2 mana 2/2 Death Touch, you got to trade that off. Great. Don't be afraid to trade it off. Maybe you'll get it back later and it'll start attritioning them, in future turns. Like once I started to just frame it as no matter what you're doing with black, it can't be aggressive. If you're pairing it with white, stop thinking you can do the mind. No, don't put Miner's Guidewing in your deck. Don't try and get tricked with whatever Bartolome. Like you really want to take advantage of Descend. I think blue black does it best. Black green second best. Reanimate packages are huge. I think this is where red black plays a really fun role with Saheeli's Lattice, being able to discard cards, volatile Wander Glyph as well. And you don't have to attack. Like you just get your Sunshot Militia, get your Wander Glyph. You're just, hey, I'm not attacking. I'm not crossing that red line. You don't need to do it. I think still be wary of black white. You can easily, this is I think where that black white deck is where it's so easy to have that 4 or 5 cards just a touch out of place, you know?
I agree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Tough spot for sure.
But I don't see the hate. I don't see the hate. I think black is great in the format.
Yeah, well, and if you look at where we graded cards, like pre-context of the format, black has a lot of cards that are graded highly. Like black just has a lot of good Magic the Gathering cards.
Yeah.
But we just didn't understand how to put into a functional deck at the start of the format. And some of that goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the episode, where like the pendulum just swung too far in, certainly for me. I don't know about you, but I just tunneled way too hard on the format starts on turn 1, white, be aggressive, all that sort of stuff, and ignored what black had to offer. And I think like the impetus behind it was well intentioned. It just got out of control.
Yeah. Well, I think we weren't perhaps then thinking, like, okay, if this is true, we didn't then take the next whatever scientific method step of, okay, if that's true, then what's next?
Right. Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is contained in black.
Yep. Okay, we're going to take a look at another draft log here. This is the draft that Ethan alluded to earlier, where pack 1, pick 1, you sit down and you see Resplendent Angel as probably the only option. There's a Master's Guide mural as well, which is a very good card, but Resplendent Angel is a bomb.
I want to just throw it out there because I've made this mistake myself with Master's Guide mural. Don't try and splash this in blue-black. Because
you don't have enough artifacts.
Well, and you also the craft.
Your splash sources.
The craft is white. Like I'm always like, oh, I could splash this. This is really powerful. And then I get to the game and I'm like, how am I crafting this again? Now I've just I'm splashing a 5 mana 4/4 in my deck. Like it's not good.
Yeah, I have not had the desire to splash that yet, but I will be on the lookout. So you take Resplendent Angel. It's 1 white for a 3/3 flyer. At the beginning of grand step, if you gain 5 or more life, you make an angel. Sarah Angel, that is, 4/4 flying vigilance angel token. And you can pay 3 white to give it +2/+2 and lifelink until end of turn.
Yep. Busted.
Pack 1, pick 2, you see the following cards as options. This is where my draft philosophy has changed a bit. So there's Tithing Blade. ETBs, each opponent sacrifices a creature, 1 and a black artifact. Deadweight, black, -2/-2. There's no good white cards to pair with your Resplendent Angel. There's no good blue cards to pair with your Resplendent Angel. And then we take a look at the uncommons, and the best of them is Eatskeenth, Firstborn of Gishath, Red green for a 2/3 haste. Whenever it enters the battle, so you move hit 2. When you do, target dinosaur you control deals damage to its power to another target creature.
So I assume, so you've selected Deadweight here. I
Mm-hmm.
assume your changing philosophy means you would select Eatskeenth if this draft were today?
Yeah, no. I would still take dead weight.
Oh, okay.
Like my gut, though, like my gut as a drafter is to want to take. I have to fight my instincts. Like my
Yes.
instinct is to want to take Eatskin here,
Yeah.
saying like I'm willing to move off Resplendent Angel if Dinosaurs is open. And I think the answer to that question for this format for me is no. Like Resplendent Angel is good enough that I'm going to play Resplendent Angel at the end of this draft.
Yeah.
So I want to take a card that is less good than Eatskin, but gives me a chance to play both it and the Resplendent Angel in the same deck. And I'm not like, after taking Deadweight here, which is what I took, I'm not locking in black-white, but I'm going to play Resplendent Angel and I'm going to play white, I think, is
Yeah.
my mentality for the format.
And that, I mean, it's about as close to forcing as you can get, my friend. Like, I know you don't want to.
No, because I've got all 4 color pairs as options. You know what I mean?
So,
Like,
yeah, but you're forcing a color. You're getting married to your
sure.
first pick, whatever sort of, like, I'm not saying this is wrong or bad, but like these are common like draft precautions or like missteps that people make that we often caution against, that I think is right to do here. Resplendent Angel is one of the best cards to start your draft with.
Well, and I think, so this goes back to like, I'm really trying hard not to complain about the format, but there's so many packs that you look at in this format and you see a pack and you think, nothing matters here.
Yes.
Like nothing in this pack matters at all in the slightest.
Right. So
And
when you
like
see a card
when you
like
get
this,
power, so when you get power like this, like it's really important that you hang on so that like when you're muddling your way through those packs that have nothing that matters, you're still building a functional deck, because then in those packs with nothing matters, you might still be picking up, you 1 and a white deal 4 to an attacking or blocking creature. Whereas if you don't have a clear direction, you're just aimlessly wandering through some packs, like picks 5 through 10.
right. And so it's not like Eatskeenth isn't good or Red Green Dinos isn't good. It's just that it's the same idea with the Polani's Hatcher, and then do you take Staunch Crewmate next? It's like, you could, like, Staunch Crewmate is that best card. It's better than Defossilize in a vacuum, in a pack 1 pick 1 scenario. But once you have Polani's Hatcher, once you have Resplendent Angel, like, what's the world where you go, oh, I'll feel things out in the rest of the draft here, and I'll take Eatskeenth here, and then I'll see what's open, red, green, or a white deck. It's like, no, you're going to give the weight to the Angel here as best you can.
Well, and I think some of the danger of hedging too is the archetypes or the pillars, however you want to think about them, the pillars of the format, like there's not a lot of overlap between them. There's not a lot where you can like toe the line in a Naya deck that like you get deep into red and maybe you're playing red-white deck with Resplendent Angel or a red-green deck with Dinosaurs. Like there's not lots of bleed in that way. Like I think blue's really the only color that does that super well, where you can get deep into blue and then like figure out what you're pairing with blue other than green. A lot of the other colors, even if you're getting deep into a color, you're getting deep into cards of the color that pair well with the other color that you're planning to play already. So like if you're getting deep into red, you're still choosing like red cards that are going to go best in a red green dinosaurs beat deck, or you're choosing red cards that are going to go best in a red white, tap 2 things deck.
Or red blue artifacts. Like there might be a little bit of overlap, but like, you're going to want to be aggressive. Like, that once you take a certain kind of card, you're already starting to push down one of those 3 paths.
Right. And so there's next to no overlap between Eatskeenth and Resplendent Angel.
Correct. Yeah, there's no world where you're like, well, I could end up white red and splash. Like, no, you're not doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
So Deadweight pack 1 pick 2. Moving on to pack 1 pick 3. See the following cards as options. There's a Quicksand Whirlpool, 5 and a white for the instant. Exile target creature. Cost 3 less to cast if it targets a tapped creature. That's the best white card in the pack. There's also Oltec Archaeologist, the 5 mana 4/4 that can scry through your rebuy an artifact.
I had the privilege in the play-in yesterday to have Oltec Archaeologists and Kitesail Larcenist, which is actually insane because you get to turn your own thing into a treasure. Like, let's say you're playing Runaway Boulder or that rare divination artifact, like any of these ETB artifacts, then you just turn your own thing into a treasure, sack it. Now your thing's in the graveyard. Boom, back with the archaeologists. Even though I think archaeologists is a clunker.
That's so cute and so niche.
It's week 4. What else am I supposed to talk about?
Week 4. And then best card in the pack, I think, is Earthshaker Dreadmaw. 4 green for 6/6 trample, and at ETBs, draw a card for each other dinosaur creature you control. You're not hedging here if you didn't hedge for each Skeeth. So I think you're just happily taking a Quicksand Whirlpool to pair with your Resplendent Angel and feeling good about like trying to draft a black-white control deck.
You could, I mean, I do think you could. There's Dreadmaw, there's also Pathfinding Axestraw and Poison Dart Frog here in terms of like green package. If you felt like green-white was a strong deck, whatever, like I think you could take it. I really like the Whirlpool pick here.
Yeah, it just gives you a clear plan. Like all 3 of the cards you've picked can go in the same deck and have a cohesive goal, which is I want the game to go long so I can find my Resplendent Angel. And I know if I do keep pairing black with it, which I don't have to do, could move off black for other cards that I see. Certainly after taking Quicksand Whirlpool here as well to get deeper into the white. That's more the reason than anything I think to take Quicksand Whirlpool is that you can pivot off black, but if you don't, you know black's going to give you recursion to replay your Resplendent Angel if it gets dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think if there's someone out there who says, yeah, but you could take Eatskeith and then you get Dreadmaw, which we are saying is the best card in the pack, and now you're pushing down a Dino's path. Is that so wrong?
That's what I was going to address next. I'm glad you asked the question. I think that's worse than where we're at now with Resplendent Angel, Deadweight, and Quicksand Whirlpool. Because then I think you're like maybe tricking yourself into pivoting off of Resplendent Angel, which I don't think you're supposed to do.
Well, and you know, there's certainly a possibility that you get something as powerful as Earthshaker Dreadmaw in the Dino's life, that as we're seeing here, but you're not guaranteed it, and certainly power level is about to drop in the next pick or two, that you're going to have to make that decision. And I would just rather not. Fingers crossed, let's see what happens. Like, it feels like you're giving the draft a reason to push you away from Resplendent Angel. And I just don't know why you want to even put yourself in that position.
Right. So moving on to pick 4, see the following cards as options. There's
this is great.
An Iron Paw Aspirant, 1 and a white for 1/2. ETBs put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. There's Cosmium Blast, 1 and a white instant, deal 4 to an attacking or blocking creature. And then there's also Spring-Loaded Sawblades, 1 and a white flash. ETBs deals 5 to a tapped creature and opponent controls, and you craft with artifact to turn it into a 5/5 Chariot.
Love taking the Sawblades here. And you're also making, I think, a bit of a statement about the kind of white deck you're drafting here by taking Sawblades and not taking Aspirant.
Yeah, it's that I want to be a control deck. Like, I want the game to go long because I have a bomb. Quicksand Whirlpool plays well in a control deck. Like, once I have Whirlpool, Sawblades, Angel, I think I am locking in white at this point and locking in white control.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily pairing it with black, but I think I'm probably only likely to pair white with black or blue at this point with the cards that I've selected.
Yeah, it'd be really hard to draft, I think, white-red or white-green control.
Yeah. So, but there's also a Dreadmaw's Ire here, again, to go along with like the dinosaur's life that could have been. But I still think you're in a worse spot.
I think that's debatable, but it's debatable only because we've seen very strong uncommon into very strong uncommon that happen to be on color with the Eatskeith. That's not going to happen. Whereas you don't need that. Like, if Spring-Loaded Sawblades isn't in this pack, you're thrilled to take Cosmium Blast.
Right.
If Cosmium Blast isn't in this pack, like, you're not thrilled to take Aspirant, but you can take Aspirant, and now maybe you're going more towards an aggro white route, and that opens up red or green or some flavors of blue to you, you know? Like, you don't have to shoot the moon in the way that I do think you kind of do. It's just that this draft happens to let you do it when you, if you did take Eatskeith pick 2.
Right. And you know me as a drafter, usually I'm bemoaning paths that could have been.
Yeah.
Like, this format has kicked that out of me this last week and a half. Like, I am eyes on the prize, baby.
I hope that stays true.
So pick 5, again, not a great pack. There's good cards for the green-red deck that could have been. There's a Deathcap Marionette here, 1 and a black for the 1/1 Death Touch. ETB's mill 2 cards. And Cogwork Rustler, if you wanted to, feel around in blue. Blue for the 1/2 flash. Target opponent creature gets -2/-0 until end of turn. But you haven't seen enough other good blue. Like, blue's pretty obviously not flowing at this point. We've mentioned no blue cards at all in the first 4 picks, and blue's very deep.
We've seen 3 Didact Echoes to let you know how good blue has been in these packs.
And then in green, there's Tendrils of the Myco Tyrant, the 2/2 that can pay 7 to turn lands into 7/7s. And there's also a very good card in Malamet Battleglyph, green for the sorcery. That card is a beating.
Yeah.
Choose target creature you control and target creature you don't. If the creature you control entered the battlefield this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then those creatures fight each other.
Yeah. And you take the Death Cat Marionette here, I think, pretty clear in terms of your path. Not locking in black as a second color, but you're pretty close, I would say. Like, it's just all very clearly on plan. And then when you get another chance pick 6, you're off to the races, right? That's the 2 and a black. You can mill 2 and then return 2 creatures. Like, it's just so clear what you're doing. And it's so clear this flavor of black white. I was just cautioning, like, don't draft black white, or if you do, just make sure nothing's, out of place. So far, nothing is out of place. It's just so clear. You want to find Resplendent Angel, you want to cast it, you want to win with it.
Well, and I'm trying to do more a black deck than a white deck. Like, my plan at this point is to be a black Descend deck that is hopefully going to mill my Resplendent Angel and then rebuy it with another chance. Pick 7, I get a Soul Coil Viper. Like, this deck, the final product had many ways to rebuy Resplendent Angel. Unfortunately, my Resplendent Angel got exiled a fair amount in some of the games.
Oh no!
But I did like my deck quite a bit.
Yeah, sweet.
And you mentioned and not ending up half and half. That was a very clean start to the draft. If we look at the final build here, I do still kind of end up half and half, which is a danger of black white. I do have Miner's Guidewing, Ruin Lurker Bat, Quad Iron Paw, Aspirant.
Yikes!
I do. I am half and half, but I still, I think, like the way I navigated the start of the draft. The deck ended up going 5-3.
The start is beautiful. The final product leaves
a little less so.
Leaves something to be desired.
But the packs just didn't let me continue down the route I was going, because I did have a very clear plan. It just didn't quite work out that way, which is, again, one of the dangers of black white.
For sure.
All right. Any parting thoughts before we go here? One final fossilosophy to get out there. Sum it up succinctly.
Oh, I will say, if you're playing in, there's another qualifier for the qualifier this coming Friday on Arena. That'll be best of 3. And then if you are playing in the Arena Champs qualifier this weekend, I think caves are, we often talk about getting power from your lands in sealed. I do think if you can maximize your caves in sealed, which we really haven't talked about that much for this format, despite I've played quite a bit of sealed so far, like, maximizing the power of your caves is a really good spot to look for in your sealed pool. Whether that's, getting your cave payoffs to work like Cave In, or whether it's just like letting, I've got 2 red caves and a green cave, letting that maybe steer you a little bit towards what that color pair looks like.
All right, juicy sealed tidbit. You love to see it. Great place to wrap us up. Thank you, as always, to Salty Pretzels for our intro and outro music. Make sure you give it a listen.
Thanks so much to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring this podcast. If you're heading over to their website for any and all purchases, getting those booster boxes for your loved ones, or maybe just treating yourself, please use checkout code LOL when you do, to let them know we sent you there, and to get 5% off anything you purchase. You can find all of our content on our website at lordsoflimited.com. Links to our previous episodes, our tier list, our merch, courtesy of TeePublic, and our Patreon page, all that good stuff at our website.
If you've got any feedback about the show or any questions, shoot us an email at lordsoflimited@gmail.com.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of Lords of Limited. Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.